Before we start this show, just a word from our sponsor, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest that pro wrestling has had to offer. Along with their awesome line of pro wrestling apparel, they do offer many services. In the world of wrestling, there are hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads. Don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. If you would like to discuss possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or whatever, drop them a line. Go to 20 by 20 Apparel. That's the number 20x, the number 20 apparel.com. Now, let's get to the show.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bummy, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what are those. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grindin' shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop it tomorrow. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. I tell I'm running out of breath, I tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh, fresh, goddammit, we fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And on Fresh is the Word, we like to deliver wisdom through great stories from the minds of bright creatives of pop culture. Through those stories, we like to dissect the journey of our guests and present actionable lessons and advice for our listeners, no matter what career or avenue of artistry they pursue. And before we get into this episode, I want to give a shout out to Knox Money, Bang Belushi, and Foul Mouth for the theme music for Fresh is the Word. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can always go to freshisthepodcast.com and just share any of the links for any of the episodes on any of your social media platforms. And also, you can subscribe to Fresh is the Word pretty much anywhere that podcasts are streamed. And that includes Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, pretty much everywhere. And please rate and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It will definitely help out the show. If you want to contact me, you can always reach me by email at djkfresh@gmail.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KFresh is the word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KFresh. And you can also follow Fresh is the Word on Twitter at Fresh is the Word, and that's is with an IZ, Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and Facebook at facebook.com/Fresh is the Podcast. This is episode 139, and on this episode, we have writer and freelance editor Leah McNaughton Lederman, who launched a Kickstarter campaign recently for Cafe Macabre, a collection of horror stories written by women with art made by women. During our conversation, we talked about the inception and all the back scenes making of the Cafe Macabre collection. Also, what makes a good editor and why you should always have a good editor for your work. Along with the spectrum of the horror genre, stories coming from the women's perspective, advice for women trying to have careers in the creative fields, collaboration, and enjoying the process. And you can get a listing of all the great writers and artists that are going to be on the Cafe Macabre collection in the show notes for this episode at freshisthepodcast.com, plus a link to the Kickstarter campaign so you too can contribute. All right, let's get on to the interview with Leah McNaughton Lederman. All right, so currently we're in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign that you started for this collection of horror stories and art all made by women. It's called Cafe Macabre. Kind of go into, how you came up with this idea and where you got the ideas to who of the people to include in this collection. I'm friends with a few of the women that you have in the book, like Casey Pierce and Stephanie Menard and Kaylin Smith and Mariana Pescasa. So, just kind of go into the history behind starting this collection.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Of course, the first embarrassing bit is exactly how long ago it was that I came up with this idea. It was, I want to say, 2016 or 17. So I guess it's not that bad. And I had a baby during the process of the book.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. We'll give you a pass. I was.
Yeah, thank you.
I interviewed the writer David C. Hayes, who did Cottontail, and he started Cottontail in like 2001 or something like that. So
yeah, no. I mean, I know that there are stories that are much older that need to be told, and I have other projects that I've been thinking of for 10 years now. But
right.
Cafe Macabre, it started when I was editing actually for Casey Pierce and for Stephanie Menard, and another woman in horror who is unfortunately not part of the book. But I'm editing all three of these women's horror stories. And at that time, my youngest son was, still a baby, not even one or, barely one. And so I would edit after everyone went to bed at night. And so I was alone in the dark, in the quiet, and I'm editing these horror stories. And it's not, it's I want to say it's worse than staying up late and watching horror movies by yourself, because when you're editing, you really have to be so deep into what you're doing, and you're so focused line by line, word by word. And I can just remember going out to take the dog out, and I was terrified. I kept looking over my shoulder, and I was like, really. And then the thing that struck me was, like, I don't even know what I'm afraid of, because there were so many different voices in my head.
Right.
From all of the different writers and all of the different characters in the stories. And it was like this big, massive, horror party going on in my head. And I'm not even kidding. I thought that's it. I want to put all of these voices together, these women's voices, not the characters talking to each other necessarily, but just the way, these three separate women writing were all meshing together in my head. I thought, let's put some more in there. Let's see who else we can get in there. And that's when, I came across the, who to select in the process. Because I work for a lot of horror authors, male and female. I also work with Howie Noldeckin and Russell Nolte and Dirk Manning. So, why all women? And to be really honest with you, it's so silly, but I just was surrounded by a lot of testosterone.
Right.
I have 5 brothers, and at that time, I had 2 sons. And when we got a dog, I said we have to get a girl dog. But you know what? I'm sorry to say this, but girl dogs, if you want a girl in your life, don't make the dog be the girl, because she's gonna I mean it, because here I got this dog next to me, and she's like farting and slurping and just being disgusting, and really, no, I wanted more women, a feminine vibe in my life. And so it's an interesting mix of people that I know from editing, and that I now know in real life, like Casey Pierce, Stephanie Menard, as you mentioned, also Michelle Joy Gallagher. And then I knew some people from online. I was in some online writing groups, and I had, shared and chatted with a lot of these people. So a couple of them, like Harlow West and Amy Hunter, I know from interactions online. And then Carrie McElroy is my dear, sweet darling from Indianapolis. She's right here in the city with me. So some people I knew in person, some people I knew online or had edited with. My sister is also a part of the collection, which is like the great big secret, because I don't want everyone to think that I'm just, into nepotism. But you know what? I put the book together.
You do whatever you want.
I can put my sister. Yeah, I put my sister in there. Now, she actually, has an incredible writing voice. So I, all of these voices, these were all women whose voices I loved, whether it was in their writing or just in their speaking. Some of them have written before, but not horror, and I asked them to write horror for me. So for all of us, I just wanted to, horror was the uniting theme, plus me. I was kind of the thread that bound everyone together. But that was it. And then the artists, again, some of these women are providing the art for their own stories. Again, like Carrie McElroy, Amy Hunter, and Harlow West all did their own. But then I got Corinna Roberts and Mariana Pescoso, like you said, and I'm flubbing on the names. I'm sorry. And Kaylin Smith. These were people that I was introduced to just online, and only just met them really over the course of creating the book. So they were just really cool ladies. Every single one of them. They've been a joy to work with. And, Crystal O'Rourke, who's like my dog, like that's DAWG. But yeah, I said it like dog, and I realized I just talked about getting, anyway. That's me being awkward again.
see, I told you, like go ahead and just be. We had this discussion before we started rolling about how you were nervous. Yeah. You're gonna say something dumb or awkward, and there you go.
Awkward.
It's fine. Got it out of the way.
It's already done. It can only go uphill from here. Let's hope. No, it's all good. And then of course, and I have to say that I also have another. Carrie McElroy will be doing her own art. She's here in Indianapolis, and then Jennifer Barnett is doing her own art, and she's here in Indianapolis. Then the next stretch goal is coming up. I'm only, last I checked, $170 away from our first stretch goal, which is going to include another story in the book. And I just got word this morning that Cora Linden will be providing the artwork for that. And she is absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't had a chance to look at her artwork, please do. Because, yeah, she knocks everyone's socks off. So this collection is just, it's been such a joy to put through and to see come together.
What was your reactions when people started submitting their works for this collection?
Oh, okay. Yeah, another good question. Some people, one or two of them, I had edited the story for them, and it didn't land with where they originally submitted it. So I said, hey, why don't you find a home for it here? And they're like, okay, yeah, cool. So some of them were just done already. And then there were a couple like stop and starts where they started to write something and they said, no, I'm scrapping that. Let me try this one instead. So that was kind of funny. What was really interesting about this experience, now normally when I edit something, I get an email, hey, can you look at this? It's so many words. I need it by this time. And no problem. I go through, I edit it, and we go back and forth, and it's done. Bing, bang, boom. It's a practical, it's a interaction or a transaction. Whereas here it was, without me even asking, almost every single writer in this collection explained to me why they had written the story that they wrote and how it came to them and why they wanted it to be in this book. So it was really interesting because it wasn't like I asked them, like, why did you write this? Or how did you think of this? They all just kind of told me. Like, it was this weird, it really was this cafe of ideas of, tell me more about your story. It was like our own little private podcast we had. Tell me more. And it really was because I never had experienced that where they were saying, well, I'm writing this because, I was having trouble sleeping or because, I had this experience. And I had never gotten the behind the scenes on the stories I edited before. So that was a really amazing part of this experience. And it was precisely what I was after. I had the idea of all these characters and voices in my head, but I also liked the idea. I love the idea of the Algonquin Circle, with Fitzgerald and Dorothy Parker and all these authors and amazing minds sitting together and just chatting it up and talking about their craft. Or I think of also the Shelleys and Byron in Geneva during the storm when they're like, oh, let's tell scary stories. And friggin' Mary Shelley, she comes up with Frankenstein. So, I'm pretty certain one of these is Frankenstein, or this whole book is, this is an amazing collection. So that was what was a really neat thing, is that this really did come out to be a cafe of ideas and voices. And so I achieved the goal I set out to achieve, and I'm really excited.
What was your reaction to the writers who didn't write horror before with the work that they submitted?
Oh my gosh. Well, I can't give too much away, because there's 11 different stories to spoil.
Right.
But I can tell you, that it was phenomenal. And that this is the thing about me that I don't advertise, especially not right now when I'm running a Kickstarter and I'm running under this umbrella of horror. I am a big scaredy cat. I don't like. I really I'm sitting here looking over my shoulder, taking my dog out at 2 a.m, and I'm freaking out because I just edited this horror. So I've kind of been. It's a crime of opportunity that I have been put in place where I'm editing horror, but it freaks me out, man. And the thing is, you hear something enough and it influences you. So I'm writing, and some of the stories I'm writing are kind of creepy. And I'm like, I'm writing horror. Who knew? And then I was like writing things down, and I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? Like, was that inside of me?
Right.
And it was, a lot of really amazing catharsis going on. Like, here's something that I'm really afraid of. So let me write it down, and that way I can kind of control it. Which is, a whole new way to feel about, your words and your own agency. And now, of course, there are sometimes when stories get away from you and you don't know who's controlling who. But I was amazed by one gal in particular who's used to be a preschool teacher, and she was while she was writing this. She wrote one of the darkest, most disturbing tales in the entire book. Like, it is the one, like, I'm waiting when the reviews start rolling in. I am afraid there's going to be like a pitchfork mob because, like, whoa, you can't do what she did. And she did it. And she did it so well. So, yeah, I guess I just know that there's a little horror in all of us because we're all afraid of things. And we're all angry about things, and those are the things that really translate well, right? When you're trying to put something into horror. So that would be my response. And then the other gal I know, she usually writes a kind of a coming to age slice of life comic, and she wrote something. First of all, her prose was just fantastic. Carrie McElroy writes regarding dandelions. It's a web comic. But I knew talking to her, like, this is such an intelligent, well-worded woman, well-spoken woman. I want to see what happens when I put her into horror. And oh my goodness, the thing she wrote, it reminded me of like, those horrible Japanese, like, Grudge, like that horrible, like, oh my God, that image of the, person walking down backwards, and we all go, oh my God. That's what her story did to me. I was like, ah. It was quite literally a story when you're reading it and you felt like something jumped out at you from the page. It was that frightening. I was like, whoa, damn. So these are people who normally did not write horror. We've got a romantic slice of life author, webcomic writer, and I have a preschool teacher, and they wrote really, really scary things. So it really worked completely according to my plan, if I do say so myself. Right. I figured if I can do it, guys, you can do it. And that was, again, one of my goals.
On the topic of what exactly horror is, I feel like that's a bigger spectrum than most people realize. A lot of people just feel like it's like blood and guts and killing and everything, but there's such a spectrum on that. Where does this collection land on that idea of what is horror?
Oh, wow. Another one. That's a good question. Okay, I'm going to go into this and just say that I am not well learned and versed in all of the correct terms, and et cetera, but I know that there's, you've got your thriller, you've got your slasher, you've got your possessions. I think, though, the word that keeps coming to me again and again as I'm putting these stories together and putting them in order is cerebral. A lot of this was very, very cerebral. The stuff that really messes with you because it comes out of your own head. And that's what, so we have a lot of dealing with insanity, a lot of dealing with isolation, these really common and primal human fears. And that's what these women did a fantastic job of tapping into. So that I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's about what I can give you. Is that these are very cerebral tales. There is some gore. I'm not gonna lie. There is some straight up gore. We've got at one point a gouged eyeball and it's flailing around in the air, and we've got stuff like that going on, and it's fantastic. But for the most part, though, no, a lot of it's just like this is really, really awful stuff that, my goodness, this person is losing their mind. We don't know what's real. And that's the scariest thing in the world, to me at least, when you don't know which end is up. That's the most terrifying. So that's the best answer I can give you. I'm sure there's better terms I could throw around, but nice. In terms of horror, there's some gore, you're going to see that, but most of it is just what's going on in my own head. And without being prompted, I feel like that's one of the hugest themes that unites all of these stories, is what is going on in this character's head. Because, we got some doozies up in here.
Being that the stories and also the visuals are coming from a woman's perspective, what does that lend to this collection?
Like I said, I've worked with a lot of horror writers, male and female. I have been trying to put my finger on and articulate what it is about the female voice that's different in this scenario. And really, I'm writing the introduction right now, and I'm really trying to get my finger on it. And so I don't have the answer perfectly formed yet. I've been looking for it for a long time, because there is a difference in what is presented as fear between men and women, and I have such a small sample here. In one sense, I don't want to make some huge overarching statement about horror when I'm dealing with a sample of a couple of dozen authors that I've worked with and read. But I feel like I see a lot more monster horror with men, like external.
Yeah.
And then people are already going to be throwing things and, yelling at me, and, my impression is that a lot of the fears, like I just used this word cerebral, and in this collection, so much of it is just internalized, that women have so much internalized fear. And I'm sure there's much broader sweeping statements we can make about that. But, one of these stories, the young woman, she's fearing for her personal safety. And that is something that we women have to be a lot more concerned about. And I check the backseat of my car before I get in, those kind of things. And stuff that just gets internalized into your subconscious. And so if you live with that kind of fear daily, and it's just worked into you to the point you can't even recognize it as a fear, it's just an instinct. Maybe even that's what it is to begin with. Right. That's going to transmute into your writing in just a very different way. I guess to go back to the question is just how does that manifest in these stories and with women writers? I just think that the nature of our fear is different, and the way that we expressed it, and especially in this collection, I think it's a good testimony to that. That it's a primal, instinctive fear. That does that make sense? I am not sure.
Oh no, it totally does. Because right now, on Shudder, they have this collection of podcasts called She Kills, and it's about the horror genre of movies from the perspective of women, and they got all these women who've been a part of slasher films and whatnot interviewing each other. And I think some of the overarching, topics is what you just said, that the sort of internal fears and in sort of horror novels, horror comic books, in movies in regards to the women characters, it's usually like those regular everyday internal insecurities sort of manifesting in this crazy way, like a crazy shocking way, to be like a common thing in like slasher films is like the final girl, the girl who's alive in the end. Why is she the one that, what did she have to do? What sort of strength did she have to tap into to be the final girl, you know. So yeah, it's all very internal when it comes to, from the, you know, horror from women or just the women characters if they're written
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Like this is not horror upon women. You know, that's a different thing. You know, this is not horror being enacted on women, although that does happen in this story or in these stories.
Right.
But yeah, this is horror told from the perspective of women. And you know, I could be wrong, and I don't want to make any huge, broad, sweeping statements about the whole genre or any subgenre therein. But I just really, I had a suspicion. Let me just say that I had a suspicion going in that the things that women would write about in horror would be different, and I think that did come out pretty clearly in this collection. So we'll see. I can't wait to hear what people have to say about this collection. So far, a few people have read a few of the stories, and you know, they're straight tripping. Like they're ready for it to come out. So I can't wait to start hearing back what people have to say about it.
Before you got into doing this project, what is your actual background? What sort of kid were you, and how did you get into doing creative things like this?
Since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be a teacher. I used to give worksheets to my stuffed animals. I mean, things like that. And it's funny because I grew up and I got my master's in English Lit, and I did become a teacher. And it didn't work out really well. I loved it. And, from everything I heard, I was pretty damn good at it. But it ended up not really working out in terms of money.
Right.
It was not financially feasible for me to teach and pay for daycare, basically. So I had to kind of, I made the choice to stay at home. Well, it really wasn't a choice. It was kind of like, this is what it has to be. We were going to save money in the long run if I stayed home. But I didn't want to just stay at home. I really am not the kind of person, I don't do well within walls.
Right.
So I also just know about, there's a very real thing on women's resumes called a mom gap. And that's where you stay at home with your kids for 10 years and then you try to return to the workforce, you've got nothing. So I was pregnant with my second child, and I think I remember turning in some edits for Dirk Manning, and I went into labor like the next morning. So, I did not have a mom gap on my resume. I went right from teaching to becoming an editor.
Was it Dirk Manning's work that put you into labor?
Oh my gosh.
Did that trigger it?
Yeah. That's really funny, actually. I'm not going to say no. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to say no. Oh my gosh. No, it really was like a sense of completion. Like, I got to finish this. I got to get this thing done. And then once I had it done, I was like, okay, now we can have the baby. But I think a lot of it, I was also writing while I was editing. I've always written since I was a little kid. I danced a lot. I took dance classes and was in dance companies. So I've always been very interested in expression and creativity. So that's never left me. And then I feel like I've just been doing concentric circles around writing. First, I was teaching it. Then I was editing it. And then I was thinking, why don't I just start writing? Just write. So that was kind of that's been my latest swan song, is let me just try to get used to saying out loud, I am a writer, when people ask what I do. I'm not comfortable with it yet. I still feel like a complete imposter, poser, I think we all do, though, right? I know people who are much farther ahead in their walk than I am, and they have the same fears. But that's kind of what set me up for it. Was I've always written, I've always liked creative expression and outlets and sought them out actively. And, as far as what kind of kid I was, this is a funny thing. I go to cons and I network and I meet a lot of comic artists and things like this. And they're all, they're geeks. And I love that about them. I'm geeky, but this is the secret. I'm not a geek. I'm a nerd. And there's a very fine line. Like, we overlap, but when it comes down to it, push comes to shove, the things I geek out about are like, human archaeological history. It's a little bit different, like people, when someone asked me, like, what was your inspiration for this story? I was like, actually, I took a MOOC, an online course about human history. It wasn't, that was what inspired this story. So, I'm a nerd, not a geek, but I am interested and actively seek out creative expression in my life. And I'm really interested in how other people express themselves. That is like, I've got so many books on my bookshelf, again, nerd, about the human language and how human language has united human civilizations and things like that. That's why I like fiction, is because I think that it has huge earth-moving, population-moving potential. So, it gets deep, yo.
Right. In regards to, you brought up the mom gap, and that's a very interesting thing that I would like to talk to you about. What do you feel like with women being with the need for more women being in these creative spaces, but also wanting to, have families? What do you feel like women need to do, or what do you feel like the industries need to do to sort of cater and balance, all those things out to where women can have families and also be creatives?
Oh yeah, that's a couple different PhD thesis dissertations. Let me start with one. First, let me just say, I fall into line with Christine Hoff Sommers when it comes to feminism, and that is, I am not a shrill feminist attorney like from The Simpsons. That's just not my brand.
Right.
I fall much more in line, like Tina Fey is my spirit animal. That woman, the things she says and her intelligence has really inspired much of my creative life and intellectual life. And I like what she said. And actually, before the podcast, I was trying to find this quote, and of course I couldn't. Right, it's 5 minutes before. But basically, the whole thing, so you talked about what can industries do to cater. You know what? Industries shouldn't be catering, because do you know who controls industries? People. So this is what you do. You do a good job. You be good at what you do, whether you are a man or a woman or, Latino or white or what have you. You be good at your job. And when you rise up through the ranks, now, again, I'm not going to get into arguments about privilege and things like this here. I know people are throwing things at me right now. But this is Tina Fey, not me. She said, be good at what you do, and then when you get to be the boss, hire the people you want to hire. That's what you do. And so that's kind of, a pretty good example right here is I got to where I wanted to be. I got to where I had enough sway that I could, say, hey, would you write a story for me in this book? And people said yes. And I thought, let's just make it all women. Now, I'm not on some all-woman crusade. That's not really what I'm after. As I said, I just wanted more women in my life. I just needed more estrogen. But that's really my whole philosophy is I'm not catering to women. I'm catering to good writers. I just happen to know a hell of a lot of really good female writers and artists, and that's who I wanted to be in my book. So I hope that answers that.
A thing that should be talked about, and I feel like maybe men don't totally understand it. Women have to deal with certain things that men don't, obviously, How does that sort of fit into the creative realm in between, deadlines and just if you're full-time staff, are you freelance, all that? How do you balance that? And what advice would you give to up and coming writers, specifically women who are having trouble balancing all of that to the point where they want to make money, but they also possibly want to have relationships, possibly a family in the future?
Yeah, you can't do it. No. Of course, I always want to canvas my advice with I don't want to just speak to moms. I try to speak to parents.
Yeah.
That's where I am. I know that there are single dads out there. I know that there are stay-at-home dads out there. Brothers with, a couple of my brothers are. So, I'm going to blanket it by saying it can happen to anyone, it applies to anyone, everyone. But I'm a woman and I'm a mom and I'm writing from home and editing from home, freelance. And I think, oh gosh, it's such a huge question to give advice. The best advice I could do is you have to be good. You have to be so good because they're going to be out for you. I remember one gentleman up on his soapbox of a Facebook page railing against all of these, quote, single moms stay-at-home moms parading at themselves as editors. And I will never forget this thread.
Ooh.
I mean, apart from the rampant misogyny of it,
Right.
but the bar is higher. This is what's tricky. This is an admission of mine. There's been times I work freelance, I work from home, and I've got a sick kid, and that affects your work even if you live at home and work from home. Like maybe even more so, because I'm not going to get my work done. And the reason I went freelance was so that I could deal with that kind of thing. And yet, even then, I really hesitate to tell a client, like, hey, I can't work on this tonight because my kid's sick. There's still the things that govern and make it difficult to be a parent in the workforce when you have kids are the same things that make it hard as a freelance. So as far as, what advice I would give, I feel like I can't say anything without all of the working parents throwing stones at me and the stay-at-home parents throwing stones at me. You just have to be so good. You have to be ahead of the game so that when your kid gets sick, it doesn't matter because you already are ahead. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I said I put a lot of padding on my deadlines. I say, hey, I can get this back to you by April 20th. When I know I can probably have it done by the 10th.
Right.
And I gave myself a full 10 days. That's a big stretch, but I did it, so you kind of have to, you pad your deadlines. You do your best you have to be better than. That's really my advice. And then the other advice is you have to write when no one else is awake, which means you either get up in the morning or you stay up late at night or you get very familiar with the speech-to-text program on your phone,
Right.
and you dictate your notes while you're driving or while your kid's asleep in the back seat, because that's all of what I do. I have written huge, long pages of writing that were basically dictated speech-to-text on my phone in an email to myself that I went back later and cleaned up. So, I can quite literally, I can write one-handed.
Oh.
So these are tools that you learn. I guess everyone writes one-handed, don't they? Anyway, but these are the things you have to learn tricks. You have to know what your routine is. You have to set a routine for yourself and you have to stick to it. Now, again, that applies to everyone, but there's a lot less wiggle room when you are a parent. Or when you're working from home. You just, one thing falls out of place and it's going to do that every single day. You have to be 5 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead, in order to, protect yourself against, the emergency room visit or whatever it may be. So, that's kind of sprawling advice, but the reason it's sprawling is because it's so huge, and I've got it all written down in better, organization, because that's a larger project I'm kind of working on. Is how, this is a book that needs to be written, because I read a lot of these writing books, and I always think, but then throw kids on top of that.
Right. There's like a lot of like the
Oh my
advice
God.
about, how to be a writer and stuff like that. It kind of comes without those like other things that so many people have in their
Yeah.
lives. Kids.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, the sick kids or the sick parents, or even when you have,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Gosh. Right.
or just
Yeah,
all
yeah,
these
you just-
intangibles,
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I was reading some advice. They were like, "Oh, is advice from women writers?" I'm like, "Oh, I'll read this." Man, Joan Didion is up in here talking about, I have to take an hour of silence before dinner and just reflect. And I was like, "Oh my God, please, you cannot." I'm sorry. If you love Joan Didion, that's great. But but what? Like, I don't know the last time I had 2 minutes of actual silence to just. So, it's just like, clearly this advice is not for me and it's for someone else, and I shouldn't, trod on it, but I just did, and I will again. But yeah, I have quite literally, even before I was a parent, I'll say that I have a picture back from my MySpace days, backstage during a dance concert, and I was grading papers. So and that's a whole nother. Teachers are just as bad at trying to balance work and life. So I've got it from a couple of different angles. My mom used to grade papers at red lights. So I there's a definite work-life distinction, and all the books try to tell you, like, you have to make that distinction. And I'm like, I don't know. I was at the emergency room, in the waiting room at the emergency room, and like I was working on a story editing. So like basically the sad thing is you do have to carry it everywhere. So that's bad advice. Don't write that down, anyone. But it's the reality that's how I get it done. So yeah, that's all I can say. I could go on, so I'll stop. But that's a whole dissertation.
Hey, if it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I'm stark raving crazy. So maybe you shouldn't, ask me for advice. But that's what I do, people. That's what I do.
For you personally, over the years, being in the writing industry, whatever roles you've been in, has there been any times when there's been any obstacles you've had to get past because you're a woman and that you were getting some sort of short-sighted idea from a man or other women? How did you get past all of that?
I put my head down and I did my job better. I don't really, I'm not the kind of person necessarily to roll off the rails like, well, they only said that because I'm a woman. I'm not, right. I don't really play that card, if you will, which is even why when I said I'm going to come up with an all-female book, I was like, oh man, everyone's going to think I'm playing the card. And I'm like, no, I just like bitches. I don't know if I want to say that.
No, it's cool.
Sorry.
Like, I think it's a cool idea. We need more, women writing horror, that was the selling point for me. I was just like, oh, this is cool. I want to read this.
No, cool. You were one of the first backers. Thank you so much, by the way. I would say, okay, so in terms of things that I have actually experienced, it has happened. I'm thinking of when I was teaching. I have absolutely, I was in a scenario, I felt that a student had addressed me in a very inappropriate way, and I spoke to my superiors about this, and they were just kind of like, yeah, you're overreacting, whatever. And they just completely ignored it. And I was like, wow, I feel really uncomfortable. And then the people who are supposed to have my back don't have my back. So that's not necessarily the same thing. They weren't like denigrating me because I was a woman, but they were definitely denigrating my fear and my level of uncomfortableness, discomfort. And all I can tell you is that it really sucked. And it was kind of one of those things like, mental note, catalog this for later. When you are in their job, when someone else is in your position, don't do that. I mean, hell, that's what I tell my kids when he comes home. He's like, well, so-and-so was mean to me. And I'm like, well, guess what? People are always going to be mean to you. Who can you help? You can only help yourself. You can only, and I'm not saying like I only help myself, but you can only control yourself is a better way to say it. I can't control what other people do, but I can control what I do. So when I see myself being put down or not listened to or not taken seriously, I just do my job better. And I also kind of don't care because I'm like, you're the wrong person to care about this. You're the wrong person to critique me on this. You clearly don't have a handle on the situation well enough. I quite literally had a superior tell me that I needed to cut the apron strings on a kid who was less than 18 months old who we had just discovered had a life-threatening food allergy.
Okay. Damn.
And I was like, really? And I got passed over for a job, and this is one where I will play the card. Like, I feel very certain that it was because I had a kid and because, certain things were going on. So, it can happen, but am I going to whine and boo-hoo about it? I might be bitter about it, 10 years later. I'll give myself that. I'm allowed that. But the bottom line is I just made sure that my behavior and my performance was impeccable. I think that's kind of been my theme along these lines is I'm not crying. I'm a victim. I'm not crying. I have less of a chance. I'm just saying I'm going to do better.
Yeah, you can't really
so that
you can't really argue with if you're doing good work.
Yeah. I mean, just really. I mean, when it comes down to it, that's what matters. I don't. I know people who only read certain authors or male authors or female authors or only certain genres. And I mean, people ask me what I read, and I think I read everything. If it's well written, I read it. I really don't care. So, that's again and again what I come back to is just be really good at what you do. Don't try to imitate anyone else. Do what you're going to do and do it better than anyone else. So that's what I go back to again and again. And I try to surround myself with people who have that same kind of outlook as much as I can.
When it comes to Cafe Macabre, what do you feel like the overarching theme of this book is? What do you want your readers to get out of reading it? Both when it comes to the stories and to the fact that this is a collection of women creatives.
I want people to see, like, holy hell, there's a lot of clout in that book. There's a lot of really powerful voices and powerful messages. And as far as what the overall message is, like, there's really not a theme to the anthology itself. And, in hindsight, that may have even been a mistake. I worried a lot while I was doing this, like, a lot of times when there's horror anthologies, they'll say, everyone write about werewolves, or you know what I mean, that kind of thing.
Yes.
I didn't do that. I just said, hey, I really like you, and I like your voice, and I want you to write me a story. That was all the guidance I gave. And as I said, like, each one of them in their own time and space was like, hey, this is why I wrote this story and why I want it to be in this collection. I didn't ask them why, but they wanted to tell me. So, dare I say I created a safe space. No, it was very clearly a parlor of ideas. I want to hear your voices. So when people read this book, I want them to sit back at the end of it and just say, hot damn, those are some really good stories. Like, I just got fed, like, this is not salad. This is not salad writing or soup and salad. This is, good meaty stuff. So yeah, there's no overarching theme to all of the stories, but there is definitely a theme to these are strong voices. This is a great selection of writers. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, totally.
But okay, because that's what I've got for it.
And how do you feel like the artistry of the book, the lends itself to the stories being told?
Yeah, in a way that even I had not anticipated when I initially thought about it. The artistry happened in a few different ways. Now, there's a few different mediums. We've got photography, we've got digital art, we have Photoshop. We've got a lot of different things going on. In some cases, for instance, with my story that I wrote for it, it features, it's a woman who's not sure what's real. And all I did was I wrote the story and I gave it to Mariana. I said, here you go. I mean, really, it was like so bare bones. I didn't tell her anything. And she wrote back and was like, oh my goodness, I'm really interested in this kind of thing with, being out of touch with reality. There's a word she used. It's totally failing me right now. I can't think of what it is. It begins with a C. Anyway, I'm sorry. She's like, no, this is something I'm really interested in. And so she showed me the sketches and the thumbnails, and she's like, this is what I got. And I'm like, holy hell, you did it right there. Boom.
Mariana's good at that. Oh, Mariana's so good at that.
Oh my God. Oh no, they all are. This is what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with freaking professionals. I mean, it was very clear, like, this is next level, because I couldn't. This is what was funny. So that was my story, and I just gave it to her and was like, here, do what you will. Then there were other stories where I was very clear with the artist, like, this is what I want. And I would talk to the writer, and in some cases more than others, but I was very much, and I hesitate to say this because I don't want to sound like I'm too big for my britches, but in some cases I very much was an art director. I was like, here, this is pretty much what I want you to do. And then other ones was like, I don't know, here's my words, you make the like that was really, and it was just amazing though. That I tried to, that was what the one artist wanted. She was like, look, I need you to just kind of tell me what to do. I'm like, no problem. This is exactly what I want. And the writer was like, yeah, that sounds good. And then with my story, I was like, I don't know. I spent so much of my soul writing the story. I can't tell you what art to make out of it. So as far as the artistry, yeah, I kind of lost track of the question there. I'm sorry. But I just thought it was really clear that the artists lent their own stories to the book. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, exactly.
The illustrations are really, in as much themselves a part. They're what's the word? Freestanding. And that is hopefully as a Kickstarter. Eventually, we'll see. No promises, but one of the stretch goals I'm kind of thinking about. You already get a PDF of the artwork in color, but later on down the line, if it comes to it, because we have till May 2nd, I would really love to see an art print book, a little booklet of the art in full color. That would just be, it's one of my personal goals, and if we don't make it with the Kickstarter, I might just do it for myself. Because I think that just the art by itself tells such a powerful story. It makes it feel like the book is three-dimensional is the best way I can put it. So
the fact that sort of the collaboration between you and the artist, where sometimes you were like, they were asking for, instructions and feedback and whatever for, what you wanted done. But then some, you were just like, here's the words, do something with it. That sort of freedom of collaboration, and that it's on sort of like a different spectrum depending on the artist. How did that lend to this collection, and how do you sort of, what's usually your status quo when it comes to collaborating with people?
To be really honest, I don't know that I've collaborated so much so far. I mean, I edit, which means I try to preserve the writer's voice. But there's definitely,
in regards to editing, like, how do you preserve the writer's voice while put in what your expertise into it?
Well, that's like asking Mozart how he Mozart. I mean, no, there really is a precision and an art to it. It's like playing Tetris with words. You know a writer well enough, and you can read a sentence and go, oh my gosh, like, that's so Casey Pierce. You can I read it and I go, oh yes, I know this. And, so you just get to know their flavor, their turns of phrase. But that's a whole thing with editing. But that is collaboration, because sometimes I'll write, say something like, oh, you should change this. And they're like, yeah, no, I don't want to. And we'll go back and forth. And ultimately I always let the author, have their way. But, that's a collaboration in terms of editing and improving the written word. As far as collaborating with artistry, it really, that was the whole point of this whole project, was it was going to be a collaboration. We were all going to work together. These voices were all together. In fact, something I really haven't talked so much about was that each of these stories, not every single woman read and commented on every single story, but most of them, we had a Facebook group together where I would post a story, everyone would read it, and we basically do peer reviews. Remember, I'm an English teacher.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I made my writers do peer reviews, and I had like a set of questions for them to answer after they had read the stories. And each writer got to see what the other women, so we workshopped these stories together. So that was a really cool process. And we didn't do that so much with the artwork. The artwork was really either, hey, this is what I need you to do, or just do what you're going to do. As far as the collaboration, I think the biggest manifestation of it, and we keep using that word, and I love it. It's actually the title of one of the stories.
Okay.
But the greatest manifestation, was that a spoiler? No, it's okay.
No, it's not a spoiler.
The title of the story is not a spoiler, Leah. The greatest manifestation of the collaboration is in the cover itself. Okay, Kaylin is amazing. I had never worked with her before. I had met her once before at a con, and I couldn't believe she agreed to do it, first of all. So I'm like, yes, ma'am, thank you, ma'am, I love you. And I'm like, kind of like crushing out and trying not to be super weird and awkward. And she was going to do the cover. And so I had this idea for the cover. I want it to be like people at a gathering, like a coffee shop or a table.
Yeah.
And then but I want this is the Cafe Macabre party. This is this weird gathering. This is the Algonquin Circle. So each writer is going to bring something to the table from their story. So I had each writer, I asked each one, what would be an object that you would bring to the Cafe Macabre party that you would have on the table? And it is like, if you look at the cover, that's what the Kickstarter logo is. That's what I've been sharing the cover for a couple weeks now.
Yes.
And it's a bunch of women sitting around a table, and one of them is wearing a Fitbit. Okay, sure. There is a ceremonial knife on the table. Okay, there's a syringe. Interesting. There's a baby monitor and a Bible a Latin Vulgate and some files, like urgent secret files. Like, there's all these different things, and each one of those
I love it.
is. Oh, thank you so much. And so that was what I told Kaylin. I was like, I need women around in a smoky, jazz type feeling.
And all drinking wine.
Setting. They're all drinking wine. Yeah. It's funny. It's like Cafe Macabre, and they're all drinking wine. My Kickstarter is like coffee themed, but I was like, this is so much wine.
What? The blood of Christ.
But yeah, the cover is the greatest manifestation of the collaboration, because we all worked together. We all brought our thing to the table, quite literally, and Kaylin put it together into that spectacular image. So again, the question was a million miles ago, but as far as collaboration, the cover is the best testament of the collaboration we went through together, and it was really amazing. And like, oh my gosh, what a great party. That's what I want. I kept saying, I want people to look at this and say, how do I get invited to that party? That's what I wanted. That's a weird, wacky ass party.
Right.
And that's what it's been. That's what it's been this whole time.
I asked this question in a previous podcast of mine when I interviewed Heather Antos, who's now the editor over at Valiant Comics. And what does an editor do, and what sort of misconceptions do people have of what an editor does?
Boy, that's there's so many levels to editing. In fact, I've written a couple of different blogs about this on my website. There is, and even within, this is why it's so frustrating. It's because even within the field of editing, you have people who will disagree or, fumble over lines. What is it, a copy edit, or is it a line edit, or is it the same thing? So you've got many different tiers of editing. There's the largest, the global editing or developmental, and that's where you just look at a story and you say, okay, here's where it works and here's where it doesn't. And you're just very broad strokes, right? And then the next level in would be, your copy or your line editing. And people will disagree with me on my terms, but you know what? As much as I've read about this, y'all editors need to get together and hash this out like Royal Rumble style.
They need like an editor's like council or something.
They have them. They do. And then there's different, oh my goodness. There's within editing itself, you've got your traditional people who are in-house working for traditional publishers, and they thumb their noses at the indie freelance editors and, those stay-at-home moms toiting themselves as editors.
Whatever, yeah. Look, I can't come into an office. Not everybody can come into an office.
Yeah, yep. It doesn't bother me. Exactly. And, people with kids can go to the office, and it's all work, but this is what works for me, and I'm good at my job and it's working. There you got your broad strokes where you're just like, here's your storyline, here's what works and what doesn't. Your chapters are too long and this character is not believable. These big, broad, big picture things. And then you've got your how well the story flows, continuity. We're looking at all of these things, accuracy. So I don't know if you really want me to go into a rundown of what every specific type of editing is, 'cause that's a huge question, but there are different levels. You've got broad strokes, then you've got like, it just zooms in closer and closer and more fine, basically. And so with a copy or line edit, you got someone going into your writing and kind of gutting it, honestly. And that, is what turns so many authors off to editors, because they're saying, I don't want them to mess with my voice. I'm like, yeah, but I can make your voice shinier. Because with even when we speak, we have all of our ums and ahs and our little repeat terms of phrase. And when you write, you have the same thing. And so your editor goes through and kind of just takes them out, or, shapes them a little bit more, and that's what they do. And so really, we're not changing your voice. We're taking the crud off of your voice so that it shines out even more. And then you've got, the finite stuff like proofreading, which I honestly always separate proofreading from editing. I think that I don't want to call it a different skill set, because it's not, but I am an editor, but I will always tell my clients, you need to have this work proofread after I'm finished with it, because I just gutted it. Okay.
Right.
I'm the contractor who came in and gutted your floor and gave you a new one. You're going to have someone else come in with the broom and sweep it up.
And inspect it and everything, a whole nother set of eyes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, that's a tricky part that people don't always understand. It's a tricky thing to define exactly what an editor does. And, people will say, they found a misspelling. Oh, the editor didn't do their job. I'm like, well, yes and no. Because it really, you need to have, there's so many separate steps to the process of editing itself that is not quite recognized or understood. So here I am trying to help you all understand it. And that is, get your stuff edited, at least have someone read it, please. And not your mom, not someone who's going to tell you that it's so great. Someone that you don't like. The person I wrote best for was my grad school professor, who used to write in the margins, "Oh, please." Oh my gosh, and he would write unbelievably weak. And I'll tell you what, I wrote better papers for him than anyone else ever in my life. So you've got to find that person in your life and have them read your writing if you can't afford an editor. Otherwise, get an editor. And if you have an editor, make sure you have a separate level that's just for proofreading. So that's a little lecture. Your question is a big one and a good one and an important one. But that's, for the scope of this podcast, I'll stop there.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers in regards to working with an editor, especially sort of the ego that might be involved, getting those notes back saying, "Oh, please," what would be your advice in regards to that process?
Yeah. First of all, I would say I am not the kind of editor to ever have in the margins. I've never written, "Oh, please," in the margins of somebody's work. I don't think. And if I have, please come forward and tell me, and I'll apologize. Okay. So your ego, and it's not even your ego. It's your frailty.
Frailty is a better word. Yes, that would be a better word to use.
It's both. It's both. It really is. I've dealt with both. First of all, you never. I'm so glad that you finished your story. I'm really happy for you. My first thing, anytime someone approaches me about editing something, my first response is congratulations, on finishing this. I know what a big deal that is. Secondly, have you taken a few weeks away from it before you shuttled it off to the editor? Because you need to get time away from that. You need to have a couple people look at it first, look at it with fresh eyes, edit it yourself a little bit. And I've got a whole, list of things to look at on my website listed. And then after you're your third draft, then you're ready to send it to an editor. And people will argue as to when and where and which draft you should be in when you send it to the editor. But as far as how to accept advice, I am a horrible person to ask this, because people have given me feedback on my stories, and I'm like, well, you don't know. I am the worst. The doctors are the worst patients. Editors are the worst at getting their work edited. I have like such a chip on my shoulder. So I guess this is going to be me doing some self-talk right here. And that's going to be my advice for you. That's going to be, Leah, if you didn't think you needed help with the story, you wouldn't have asked for the help. And so when you're given the help, don't yell. You wait 24 hours. This is always whenever I had students who would like ask me really ridiculous things, and I would want to be like really mad and like type really hard into the keyboard and like yell at them. I always made myself, it happened a lot. I would make myself wait, like I would sleep on it or wait 12 to 24 hours. And that's like really almost the best advice. It's like your knee-jerk response to the editor is not what you should send back to them because they're not trying to hurt you. You, quite honestly, literally, you hired them to make your writing better. So don't yell at them when they do what they ask you to do. And as far as, not taking it personally, you knew you needed help. You knew your editor and you want the same thing. They want the best. You want the story and your writing to be as shiny and pretty as possible. And if you don't feel, this is the great advice here, is if you don't feel that that's what your editor is after, get a different editor. An editor is like a doctor, okay? And in terms of, you ever just like meet with a doctor you just didn't really mesh well with, or a hairstylist, or
yes.
I don't know what other thing. I just didn't, oh my gosh, this lady kind of butchered my hair recently and I was really pissed. And the bottom line was she was really good at her job, but she and I just did not connect.
Of course, yes.
And that was it. And then I totally admit, because I didn't connect with her, I didn't communicate well with her what I needed. And so she wasn't able to do a good job. So I'm basically making my hairstylist an analogy for an editor. But you have to find an editor that you mesh well with, that you communicate well with. So, send some emails back and forth. Do you like how they talk to you in an email? If you don't like how they talk to you in an email, you're sure as hell not going to like how they talk to you about your own work. So that's good advice. Write that down. But that's about it. And, we all want your writing to be the best that it can be. So that's what you're after. That's what your editor's after. You ask them for help. So be open to receiving that help and wait 12 to 24 hours before you flip your shit and flip tables. That's my advice.
During the whole editing process, as a writer, how does a writer go about sort of enjoying the process, realizing that it's not a sprint, it's more of a marathon? How do they sort of not be antsy about it and want it to be, the whole process to be sped up just so they can get it done? How do they sort of enjoy the journey along the way?
Mm-hmm. Okay, first of all, did Dirk Manning tell you to use the phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint?
No, but I've heard it elsewhere, and I've been using it
a
lot lately.
I'm shaking. Oh my God, I'm shaking my fist. Because that's always, it's like his go-to mantra, and I get so mad. I'm like, shut up!
Wait a minute. Wait. I just started reading his book, Right or Wrong. Is it at the beginning of that?
Oh, that's an amazing. Oh, it's everywhere. It's just one of his mantras, and it's a fantastic mantra. It really is.
It was probably at the beginning of that, and I probably just read it, and that's why I've been using it.
Really. Okay, that makes sense because I'm just laughing because just earlier today in an email he said that to me, and what was he had a hashtag marathon not a sprint, and then his other hashtag was deal with it because he knew I was mad that he said marathon not a sprint. I'm like, God damn. So this is hysterical to me. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and if you're reading Right or Wrong, it's definitely in your subconscious right now. That book is so phenomenal. I'm so glad you're reading it. Okay, so you want to know in the writing process, how do you just enjoy it? Okay.
Right.
Well,
and not be antsy and not try to get from A to Z. This is something I've been working out in in therapy for the past year and a half. There was a lot of times when I would just want to go from A to Z and not enjoy the process. So this is actually something that everybody can kind of learn, I guess.
Yeah, right. Okay. The first things I'm thinking, this is such an interesting question. The first things I'm thinking is, first of all, I don't always enjoy it. I just don't. Okay. Sometimes you're just you just got to clunk through and get it done. It's not about whether you're enjoying it or not. You just have to get it done. Like it's like cooking. Okay. My husband, he cooks and he's got every pan in the kitchen is out and dirty. And, you know, he's talking about all the mouthfeel and all. I'm like, oh my God, just cook the goddamn dinner, you know, and I'm looking at all the stuff I'm going to have to clean up, you know, but when I cook dinner, it's like, it's a function. Of course I'm doing it out of love and blah, 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 but no, I'm doing it because it's a practical need and it has to be done.
Right.
That's it. I'm not going to philosophize about it. I'm not going to write some stupid ass 8-page long food blog about it. I'm just going to make the goddamn dinner and shut up and eat it.
Right.
And sometimes that's how writing is.
And even going back to the marathon analogy, I don't think people who run marathons love the marathon the whole time. Or the training. Right, exactly. I'm going to avoid the marathon metaphor as much as I can. I'm going to I got my cooking metaphor. Yo, use your cooking metaphor. That's good, man. Use it.
I'm just teasing. No, yeah, it's cooking metaphor is it's not always an enjoyment. Sometimes it's just a practical function of what needs to happen. But because I use this practical function so often for so long, you know, the real enjoyment is like when my kids shut up and they just eat it and they're quiet and not making noise because they're hungry and they're actually eating it. I managed to do that because I starve them for like 3 hours before dinner. And then like every third week, it never works. Every third week they'll shut up and just eat and be happy. But that's the enjoyment. It's like, oh, something worked. And that's what happens, you know, with writing. It's not this great hippie process of, oh, I love it, and I need to meditate for an hour before dinner, and oh my gosh, no. You're clunking through, you're exhausted, you're, you know, wearing sweatpants or no pants, I don't know, and you're just clunking through it and you're getting it done. And you clunk through it enough, and then sometimes every third week, you'll write this scene. It just writes itself. It just comes out and you're like, whoa, did that come out of me? And that's the enjoyment. But you don't get the enjoyment without, you know, the clunky, awkward, just drilling yourself through it part. You know, let's do the marathon metaphor. You don't get the runner's high if you didn't make that push. So as far as the writing process and trying to enjoy it, writing, this sounds hokey, but writing is almost its own entity. It's a living, breathing thing. And sometimes writing is in a bad mood.
Right.
Sometimes writing is like my, 4-year-old throwing a tantrum, and you're like, oh my God, how are you so miserable?
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to trust that it will come eventually. Yeah. It might be later in the day. It might be tomorrow. It might be next week, Yeah.
Yep. But you have to do it. And that is the hard part. You have to just do it. And, I don't get to not be a mom to my 4-year-old. When he is screaming and crying, I still love him and I'm still his mom. And then later on, when he just comes to me and touches my cheek and says, hey, Mom, I love you. And you're like, oh, that's the reward. And so writing is very similar. And, oh, I sound like such a hokey person being like, writing is my children. No, but it's a living thing, and you have to deal with it. Okay, you don't get to have it, do wonderful things if you don't put the time in and just grind, pedal to the metal, what have you, whatever it is. You don't get the enjoyment unless you're willing to put the time in. I think that's the best way I can answer that. And I'll come up with other weird analogies, so just stop me now.
No, that's fine. And what I appreciate about you and all the lessons that you said on this episode is that you've tied them into real world situations of your own. And yeah. I feel like that is more enjoyable and is more easier to learn from than just anything else. If you can tie it to something that you can connect to, then I feel like people can learn better.
That's how I roll. That's exactly what I do. So I'm glad it's working.
I always like to ask this question of people, like, what would be sort of a nugget of knowledge, from your life and career that anybody listening to this podcast, it doesn't matter what sort of avenue of artistry that they're in, that they could sort of project into their own life?
Oh boy. I'm trying to think of anything really amazing I've said in the last 40 minutes. I don't have these great nuggets. Mine is always like you just do the work. Like that sounds horrible, but it applies to my creative life so much. Like when I was in dance in college, like I was never the prima ballerina. I was never selected for solos. I was never in the front row because I wasn't the best. But it didn't matter whether or not I was the best. I showed up for freaking rehearsal. I showed up. And so there it must be that's my mantra right there. You have to show up. And
right. That's a good thing to say because you show up, you do the work, and you kind of find your role.
Yeah. If you don't show up, you don't know what's happening. Your finger is not on the pulse of what is being created. You're just the, pretentious asshole at the party who's like, oh, I'm an artist. I'm like, really? What have you done for me lately? Right. I think that would be the thing I could honestly, like, I don't like to give advice if I can't take it myself. And so I think the thing that I live by is you have to show up. And I don't always show up. I mean, sometimes I fall short. But more often than not, even if it's ugly, even if it doesn't make sense, or I have to scrap it and start from the beginning, I showed up. I showed up to the rehearsal. I wasn't the best. I wasn't the prettiest. I wasn't, the most graceful, but I showed up and, there's a lot you can build off of that. So it's very simple and it can be permutated into various ways, but that would be it. My advice is you've got to show up.
Great. And I always like to end my interviews with the same question, and I send it to you beforehand. Who is somebody that is a part of your life or career that I could realistically interview for this podcast that would have some great stories or lessons to talk about?
Oh yeah, there's so many, right? I'm surrounded by such fantastic minds. I love the work that Dirk Manning, Russell Nolte, Casey Pierce, those are all people I admire who they show up and they work their asses off. But you asked me this question earlier, and I was thinking about someone who is in my life, in my professional career right now, that I have really been impressed with Michelle Joy Gallagher in this process of writing this book, writing these stories for this book and collaborating. Her enthusiasm is infectious. I had a lot of cheerleaders on my squad, right? And she was like front row, front and center. She has a lot of stuff coming out right now. And she's a poet, which is also, you asked me earlier about, people I had put in the book who weren't really horror writers. She writes dark things, but she does not write prose necessarily. So she's a poet. And this is going back to an earlier question, but I knew her voice needed to be put into prose. Just like Carrie McElroy with Regarding Dandelions and her webcomic, I wanted to put her into prose. So Michelle Gallagher is a poet, but I asked her to write prose, and the story she wrote, she knocked it out of the park. And she's got poetry in The Rejected right now with Stan Konopka, and she's got other stuff coming out on. So she's really riding high on her minute right now, and she's doing great. And this is not her minute. She's been showing up. She's been putting the stuff out there, and she's got really dark stuff. She's got it's just very thoughtful stuff. When I read her poetry, I'm like, damn, like that hit me. But then the thing you don't know about her, but you know about comedians. Comedians tend to be very dark people. She is freaking hilarious. And I think that's why she makes memes, and when I am talking to her, she makes me quite literally laugh out loud. So she is a person right now in my life that I think is worth following up with. I'm really ecstatic that she is in this book, and I think she's got some really, really amazing things coming. Like, the world's not quite ready. So I don't know if that's quite the answer, what you were looking for, but when you asked me that question earlier, I thought, who is someone in my life right now, personal, professional, who's worth following, who's worth looking out for? I think it's Michelle. She's very honest. She's very funny. She's very deep. And yeah, I've been very impressed with her. Even on a professional level, like the photograph that featured as her artwork for her story is a historical photograph. And I'm running around trying to get permission and contracts and all this stuff. She went ahead and she contacted the museum, and she got the permission for the story to be included in the book, for the photo to be included in the book. And look, she's just very impressive. So that would be my answer. Michelle, get it, girl. That's it.
Sounds good to me.
And to believe me, that was like the hardest question in the world, because I just worked with, for several years with all of these people, and but that's who I came on today.
Before we get out of here, where can people go online to get more information about what you're up to, and then where can they go to contribute to the Cafe Macabre Kickstarter?
Okay, so the Cafe Macabre Kickstarter, I don't have the URL memorized. But you just look up Cafe Macabre, and we're on Kickstarter. I've been shouting it from the rooftops on social media. I tend to live on Facebook, because that's where I'm most comfortable, and I work out of my editing page, so you can find me at facebook.com/Lederman editing. And Lederman is spelled Lederman. You can also find me at leahlederman.wordpress.com. That's my blog, where I write about, different things I have published, different thoughts I have on my blog about. No, this is not just nose-picking blog. It's like I write about writing and editing, and I've written a little bit about parenting. That's kind of starting to come into it, but you can find me there. So look me up on Kickstarter, Cafe Macabre. Look me up on Facebook, Lederman Editing, and my blog is leahlederman.wordpress.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, but I'm really bad at those things. I'm trying to get better. Oh my gosh, Casey Pierce was like trying to help me earlier. I was so embarrassed. I'm like, girl, I'm like 1 year older than you. I just felt so old. Like, I can't do it. So anyway, that's how you can get me. And back to Kickstarter, back to Project Cafe Macabre. It's really incredible. It's been a real journey, and I think that it shows in the pages and in the artwork. And thank you, Kelly, so much for backing it.
Oh, no problem. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to knock your socks out.
So that was my interview with Leah McNaughton Lederman. Go ahead and support that Kickstarter for Cafe Macabre. All the links to where you can follow Leah and the Cafe Macabre Kickstarter are in the show notes for this episode at freshasthepodcast.com. Another great show in the books. Thanks for listening. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.